Rain fell over Seoul the night everything changed. The kind of cold, relentless rain that soaks through bone and makes the whole city smell like wet concrete and diesel. In an alley behind a shuttered noodle shop, a little girl no older than 8 sat curled against a brick wall, her knees pulled to her chest, her thin arms wrapped around them like they were the only thing holding her together. Her name was Ha-yoon, though almost nobody in that city knew it, and almost nobody cared. If you're new here, hit that like button and subscribe now, because this story about to unfold is one you will not forget by the time it ends. She had been alone for 3 days. Her mother had disappeared after a debt collector came looking for money that didn't exist, and Ha-yoon had learned, in the cruelest way a child can learn anything, that the world does not wait for you to grow up before it breaks your heart. She had stopped crying by the second night. Tears, she discovered, did not fill an empty stomach or warm frozen fingers. So she simply sat and waited and watched the rain fall, because waiting was the only thing left to do. That was when the black car arrived. It rolled to a stop at the mouth of the alley, engine humming low, headlights slicing gold through the silver rain. Ha-yoon did not run. She was too tired to run, and besides, in a city like this, men in black cars usually meant one of 2 things: trouble or nothing at all, and she had long since stopped expecting anything else. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than her mother had earned in a lifetime, an umbrella raised above him by a silent bodyguard. His name was Kang Tae-ho, and in the underworld of Seoul, his name alone could empty a room or fill a grave. He ran an empire built on shipping routes, shadow companies, and debts that were never truly forgiven. Men like him did not stop for children in alleys, but he stopped. He crouched down in front of her, ignoring the rain soaking into the cuffs of his trousers, and looked at her the way no one had looked at her in a very long time. Not with pity, not with suspicion, but with something quieter, something almost like recognition. "Are you alone?" he asked. Ha-yoon did not answer. She only stared back at him, waiting for the trick, the catch, the moment this turned into something worse. It never came. Instead, he took off his own coat and wrapped it around her small shoulders, and said 4 words that would rewrite the rest of both their lives. Not anymore. Come. His men exchanged glances that night, nervous, unspoken questions about why the most feared boss in the city was carrying a homeless child into his penthouse instead of leaving her in the monk rain where he'd found her. Kang Tae-ho did not explain himself. He never did. But those who had worked beside him long enough understood that somewhere behind the cold calculation and the ruthless business decisions, there was a man who remembered what it meant to have nothing, and had simply chosen, for once, not to look away. The years that followed were not simple. Ha-yoon did not step into a fairy tale. She stepped into a world of locked doors, guarded gates, and a household staffed by men who spoke in hushed voices and carried themselves like soldiers, because in many ways, they were. She learned quickly that her new father's business was not the kind you asked questions about at the dinner table. She learned to recognize the sound of tension in a room before anyone said a word. She learned, too, what it meant to be protected, fiercely, completely, unconditionally, in a way she had never known before. Kang Tae-ho raised her like his own daughter, and in every way that mattered, she became exactly that. He was not a gentle man by nature. His voice rarely rose above a low, even tone, and his silences could fill a room more completely than shouting ever could. But with Ha-yoon, something in him softened in ways his closest men had never witnessed. He sat with her while she did her homework at the enormous mahogany desk in his study, correcting her math with more patience than he showed his own lieutenants. He attended every school event, standing at the back in his dark suit, like a shadow guarding something precious, while other parents whispered about who he might be. He never touched the business in front of her. He built a wall, thin, imperfect, but deliberate, between the empire he ran in the dark and the soft childhood he was determined to give her in the light. She thrived, despite the whispers that followed her. The daughter of the mafia boss, some called her. Half in fear, half in envy, Ha-yoon grew into a fiercely intelligent, disciplined young woman. She excelled in school not because anyone demanded it of her, but because she had decided, somewhere deep inside, that she would never again be the girl sitting helpless in an alley, waiting for the world to decide her fate. She wanted control over her own life. She wanted to understand the rules well enough that no one could ever use them against her, or against the people she loved. And so, while other daughters of powerful men chased status and comfort, Ha-yoon chased law books. Kang Tae-ho watched her ambition with a complicated pride. Part of him worried. The law and his world were natural enemies, and he knew it better than anyone. But another part of him, the part that remembered a girl in the rain who deserved a life free of fear, encouraged her every step of the way. Become someone untouchable, he told her once, the night she was accepted into law school. Not untouchable like me. Untouchable because no one can ever again make you feel powerless. 15 years passed, the way years do when you are not paying close enough attention, in a blur of exams, internships, late nights, and quiet dinners shared between a father and daughter, who understood each other in ways words rarely captured. Ha-yoon became a lawyer, sharp and formidable, the kind who read every line of a contract twice and never lost an argument she believed in. She built her own name, separate from her father's, determined to prove that her success was hers alone. She rarely visited the parts of his world that still operated in shadow. She did not need to. She had made peace with the fact that her father lived 2 lives, and she had chosen, quietly, to only ever know one of them. There was one year, when Ha-yoon was 14, that tested everything Kang Tae-ho had tried to build for her. A group of girls at her school had discovered exactly who her father was. Not the polished version he presented at parent-teacher conferences, but the version whispered about in news, reports, and half-true rumors passed between adults who thought children weren't listening. They cornered her by the lockers one afternoon, repeating things they'd overheard their own parents say, calling her father a criminal, calling her a fraud, who only had nice things because of blood money. Ha-yoon came home that day and said nothing at dinner. She picked at her rice, answered in short sentences, and excused herself early, and it was the silence, more than anything she could have said, that told Kang Tae-ho something was wrong. He found her later that night sitting on the floor of her room, back against her bed, staring at nothing. He did not demand to know what had happened. He simply sat down across from her, on the floor, in his 3-piece suit, the way a man like him never sat for anyone, and waited. Eventually, she told him everything. The names they called him, the names they called her, the shame she had never let herself feel until that afternoon. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening only slightly at the details. And when she finished, he did not offer to have anyone dealt with, did not make a single threat, though everyone in that house knew he could have. Instead, he asked her a single question. Do you believe what they said about you? She shook her head. Then it doesn't matter what they believe, he told her. It only matters what's true, and you decide what's true about yourself, not them. The next morning, he walked her to school himself, in full view of everyone, and said nothing more about it. But the bullying stopped within the week, not because anyone was threatened, but because a girl who had once felt small, learned, that night, exactly how to stand up straight. It was a small moment in the span of 15 years, but Ha-yoon carried it with her longer than almost anything else. It was the moment she understood that her father's protection was never really about the empire behind him. It was about teaching her to carry her own strength, so that one day, she would not need him standing between her and the world at all. She did not know then how soon that lesson would be tested in a courtroom instead of a school, hallway, or how completely she would need every ounce of the resolve he had spent a decade quietly building in her. Then, the empire that had protected her all those years came crashing down around the man who built it. It started the way these things always do, with a rival who had waited far too long for his chance, and a prosecutor eager to make her career on the back of Seoul's most notorious boss. Evidence was gathered, some real, some fabricated by men who had learned that in this business, the truth was simply whatever could be proven in a courtroom. Kang Tae-ho was arrested on a cold morning, led out of the very penthouse where he had once carried in a shivering child, in handcuffs, in front of cameras that had been tipped off in advance. The empire he had spent 30 years building teetered on the edge of collapse within days. His usual lawyers, the ones paid handsomely for exactly this scenario, folded under pressure or quietly disappeared, unwilling to stake their reputations on a losing case, dressed up to look unwinnable. Ha-hin found out from the news. Like everyone else, she sat frozen in her office, watching footage of her father being walked to a police car, his expression unreadable, the same calm mask he had worn the night he found her in the rain. She thought of everything he had given her, not just the house, or the education, or the safety, but the simple, unglamorous gift of being chosen, of being wanted, and in that moment, every ounce of hesitation about the world he came from dissolved into a single, unshakable resolve. She would not let him fall, not because his empire mattered to her, it never had, but because the man underneath it, the one who had knelt in the rain for a stranger's child, deserved someone to fight for him the way he had once fought for her. The case against Kang Tae-ho was built on testimony from a former associate turned informant, financial records that had been quietly altered, and a timeline riddled with inconsistencies that no one on the prosecution's side expected anyone to examine too closely. Ha-ain examined them closely. She spent weeks buried in documents, cross-referencing shipping logs, bank transfers, and witness statements with the same relentless discipline she had once poured into her studies as a girl determined never to be powerless again. She found the gaps. She found the moment where the informant's story contradicted verified phone records. She found the falsified date on a wire transfer that the prosecution had built its entire case around. When she walked into the courtroom on the day of the trial, she was not the frightened, homeless child the rain-soaked alley had once nearly claimed. She was a woman in a tailored navy suit, her father's coat metaphorically still around her shoulders in every way that mattered, carrying 15 years of gratitude transformed into precision and purpose. The courtroom fell silent as she took her place, not as his daughter, but as his lawyer, the one person the world had least expected to walk through those doors on his behalf. She dismantled the prosecution's case piece by piece, calmly, methodically, without ever raising her voice, the same way her father had once taught her to move through the world. She exposed the falsified timeline. She revealed the informant's financial incentive to lie. She presented evidence the prosecution had conveniently overlooked, proving that the empire's rivals had orchestrated far more of this collapse than any court transcript would ever officially admit. Members of the press who had shown up expecting to watch the fall of a mafia boss instead witnessed something far more complicated, a daughter saving the father who had once saved her, in the one language that could actually set him free. When the verdict came down, insufficient evidence, case dismissed, Kang Tae-ho did not smile, not in the way most men might after avoiding a life sentence. He simply looked across the courtroom at his daughter, and in his eyes was the same quiet recognition he had shown her 15 years earlier in that alley, except now it was doubled back on itself, repaid in full. Ha-yoon walked to him, unlocked from his restraints, and for the first time in front of his entire crumbling empire, he embraced her without hesitation, without the careful distance he always kept between his two worlds. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly, his voice rough in a way none of his men had ever heard it. "Neither did you," she answered. 15 years ago, the empire, in the end, did not survive fully intact. Some of it crumbled anyway, eaten from the inside by rivals who had already moved on the moment his arrest became public. But Kang Tae-ho found, standing in that courthouse hallway with his daughter's hand in his, that he no longer measured his life by the empire at all. He measured it by the girl he had once wrapped in his coat, who had grown into the only person strong enough to give him back his freedom. In the months that followed, Kang Tae-ho quietly began stepping back from the world that had defined him for 30 years. handing off what remained of his operations to trusted hands, while he focused, for the first time, on simply being a father in daylight instead of a shadow at night. Ha-Un opened her own small legal practice, one that specialized, fittingly, in defending people the system had already decided to write off. The overlooked, the disbelieved, the ones sitting in metaphorical alleys of their own, waiting for someone to stop the car and ask if they were alone, because she remembered, more than anything else, what it felt like to be chosen when the whole world had already looked away. And she had learned, in the truest way a person can learn anything, that family is never only about blood. It is about who stops in the rain, who kneels down to your level, who says, "Not anymore," and means it for the rest of your life. 15 years after a mafia boss adopted a homeless girl in an alley, that same girl walked into a courtroom and gave him back everything he had ever given her. Not an empire, but a future.